Welcome to the debate.
We are diving right into a really profound tension today.
Right, we are looking at the book of Genesis, specifically that collision between divine providence and human agency. Does the text present a universe where history is just this fixed divine script, or is it one where human choices, radically alter the course of events?
Yeah, it's the ultimate narrative tension. You have this infinite creator, yet he steps into the dust to contend with mortals, allowing the human to actually shape the outcome.
Exactly. And I argue that Genesis primarily illustrates an overarching divine determinism, like human actions, even the really malicious or deceitful ones, are ultimately orchestrated by God to fulfill his unbreakable covenantal promises.
And I hold the contrasting view. I contend that Genesis emphasizes radical human agency, depicting this dynamic reality where God reacts to, negotiates with, and is even genuinely grieved by human choices, making the future entirely malleable.
Let me start by laying out the framework for this divine providence, because when you read Genesis carefully, it operates as a masterclass in teleology.
Right, pulling from the future rather than pushing from the past.
Yes, exactly. Teleology is that philosophical concept that things are directed toward a final predetermined end. History isn't just stumbling forward, right? It is being magnetically drawn toward a specific conclusion that God has already written.
Okay, but where do you see the anchor for that?
The ultimate anchor for this perspective is the Joseph narrative spanning the end of the book. Look at the cosmic mechanics of what Joseph tells his brothers after he reveals his identity in Egypt in chapter 45.
That big reveal.
Yeah. He says, I was sent here, not by your counsel, but by the will of God. And he explicitly states, God sent me before you into Egypt for your salvation. This isn't just retrospective comforting.
But he's speaking from hindsight there.
He is, but think about when Joseph is a teenager. He has those prophetic dreams, his brother's sheaves of wheat bowing down to his, the sun, moon, and 11 stars reverencing him.
Right, the dreams that got him thrown in the pit.
Exactly. And later, Pharaoh has his own dreams about the 7 fat cows being devoured by the 7 emaciated cows. These aren't just possibilities. They are fixed, unalterable futures implanted into the minds of mortals.
I see what you're saying, but
So the brothers' brutal betrayal at Dothan, stripping Joseph, throwing him into a cistern, was simply the harsh mechanism required to achieve the predetermined salvation from the famine.
you're framing this as a closed, mechanical loop. But the text absolutely refuses to let human beings off the moral hook.
How so?
Well, reading Genesis as a rigidly deterministic script drastically diminishes the visceral reality of human choice. Let's look at the exact language used at the very end of the book, in chapter 50. Because it provides the mechanism for how this actually works.
You mean when Jacob dies?
Right. After Jacob dies, the brothers are terrified Joseph will take his revenge. They throw themselves down, offering to be his slaves. Joseph says to them, "You devised evil against me, but God meant it for good."
Which proves my point, doesn't it? God orchestrated the good through their actions.
Wait, let me stop you there. Because we really need to look at the underlying Hebrew. The word used there for both human and divine action is hashav. It means to weave, to plot, or to calculate.
Okay.
Joseph is literally saying you wove a tapestry of evil against me, but God re-wove it into a tapestry of good. The malice of the brothers was entirely real, entirely their own, and entirely freely chosen. God is not the author of their wreckage.
But he uses it.
Yes, he is the ultimate improviser. The concept here is compatibilism, God's overarching purpose and radical human free will coexisting. God takes the wreckage of human sin and salvages it.
So you're saying he reacts to them.
Exactly. The brothers weren't forced to sin so that God could save Egypt. Rather, God was masterful enough to utilize their sin once they freely committed it.
But, doesn't that create a massive logical black hole regarding the prophetic dreams?
How do you mean?
If the brothers genuinely had the radical free will to simply leave Joseph alone, let's say Reuben had successfully convinced them to just pull Joseph out of the cistern and send him back to their father in Hebron, wouldn't the prophetic dreams from God be demonstrably false?
Well, no, because...
Think about it. How do you reconcile human freedom with a God who plants inevitable futures in the minds of teenagers and Egyptian monarchs? If God shows Pharaoh that 7 years of famine will strictly follow 7 years of plenty, Those events must come to pass.
Right, the famine is fixed.
Yeah. And the brothers' choices are circumscribed by that divine necessity. They couldn't have chosen otherwise without breaking the prophecy.
It only creates a logical black hole if you conflate foreknowledge with causation. This is a crucial distinction.
Expand on that a bit.
Just because God perfectly knows what free agents will do does not mean he forces them to do it. If I watch a recorded baseball game, I know exactly when the batter will strike out. My knowledge of the event doesn't cause him to swing and miss.
Okay, I follow the analogy.
God's sovereignty in Genesis isn't a tightrope where one human misstep ruins the whole act. It's a massive highway. The humans can swerve all over the lanes, but they are still traveling in the direction God accommodates.
I understand the distinction between foreknowledge and causation. But Joseph's brothers didn't learn that betrayal in a vacuum. That chaos, that swerving on the highway you mentioned, that is generational.
Oh, absolutely. The whole family is deeply flawed.
Right, so if we look at their great-grandfather, Abraham, we see exactly how God manages these human swerves. I look at the overarching covenant like a mighty river.
A river?
Yeah, a mighty river. Human beings in Genesis can splash around in it. They can swim upstream for a bit, or they can create little eddies of chaos. Think of Abraham lying about Sarah to Abimelech, claiming she is his sister out of fear for his own life.
Or Jacob deceitfully stealing Esau's blessing.
Yes, perfect example. These are human choices, but the divine current is overwhelmingly strong, forcing them eventually into the predestined ocean of the covenant.
But the splashing has consequences.
Let me finish the thought. When Abraham lies to Abimelech, God literally steps in, threatens Abimelech with death in a dream, and course corrects Abraham's human error to protect Sarah. God forces a narrative back onto the rails. The humans splash, but the river flows where God dictates.
I actually love your river analogy because it perfectly visualizes the text. But you can't just hand-wave the destruction of entire family lines as inconsequential splashing.
I wouldn't call it inconsequential, but
If we follow your analogy to its logical conclusion within the text, that splashing creates permanent, devastating, divergent branches in the watercourse. Human choices in Genesis leave permanent scars on the geography and history of the world.
what branches are you thinking of?
Because Sarah and Abraham lacked the patience to wait for the promised son, they used Hagar the Egyptian to conceive Ishmael. That wasn't a little eddy that smoothed itself out. That created a permanent, agonizing fracture.
Well, God still takes care of Ishmael.
Yes, but God tells Hagar in the wilderness that Ishmael will be a wild man, and he becomes a great and separate nation outside the primary covenant.
At the main channel of the river, the covenant with Isaac survives entirely unblemished.
Survives, yes, but surrounded by collateral damage. Look at Jacob's deception, which you brought up. By stealing the blessing, Jacob ignited Esau's bitter, murderous hatred.
True, he had to flee for his life.
Exactly. And Esau departs to Mount Seir and becomes Edom. That fracture between the nation of Israel and the nation of Edom becomes a permanent geopolitical reality in the biblical landscape.
So you're saying the river changed shape?
Radically. God adapts to these choices. He blesses Ishmael and he blesses Esau, but he honors the severe consequences of human agency. The damage is real, the divergence is real, and the river is permanently altered because of their autonomous choices. God doesn't just erase the consequences to keep a neat script.
He doesn't erase the consequences, but he structurally guarantees the final destination regardless of human performance.
How does he guarantee it if he's reacting?
To understand why the script is guaranteed, we have to look at the legal mechanism of the covenant itself. In chapter 15, God makes his formal promise to Abraham that his offspring will inherit the land.
The covenant between the pieces?
Right. The text uses the mechanism of an ancient Near Eastern suzerain vassal treaty. Normally, in these treaties, animals are cut in half and both the king and the vassal walk through the blood.
Effectively saying, may this be done to me if I break my end of the bargain.
Exactly. But what happens in Genesis 15? God puts Abraham into a deep sleep, a dread, great and dark, and God alone, appearing as a smoking furnace and a flaming torch, passes between the pieces.
It is a profoundly unilateral moment. I'll give you that.
It is the ultimate proof of a deterministic script. By walking through alone while Abraham is unconscious, God takes the entire burden of the covenant upon himself.
Bypassing Abraham entirely.
Yes, it relies solely on divine providence. It completely bypasses human agency, effectively stating that no matter how much Abraham's descendants splash around, God will unilaterally enforce the outcome.
It is a foundational covenant, I grant you that. But you are isolating one moment of divine unilateralism and ignoring the overwhelming pattern of divine reactivity.
Reactivity like what?
What happens when human beings directly attempt to negotiate that divine will? Because they do. I look at Abraham's negotiation over Sodom and Gomorrah in chapter 18.
Ah, the famous bartering scene?
Right. God reveals his intention to investigate the grievous outcry against the cities. And Abraham boldly steps in front of the creator of the universe and challenges his justice. He asks a breathtaking question. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? Will you destroy the righteous with the wicked?
He challenges God, yes, but to what end?
To a highly effective end. Abraham, acknowledging he is but dust and ashes, proceeds to barter with God. He negotiates the threshold for the city's survival down from 50 righteous men to 45 to 30 to 20 and finally down to 10.
And 10 was a significant number.
Very. 10 wasn't an arbitrary number. In ancient Near Eastern culture, 10 was often the minimum number required to constitute a community, a minyan. And God explicitly agrees to these new terms, saying, I will not destroy it for the sake of the 10.
But
this powerfully demonstrates a God who listens to human reason, accepts human intercession, and actually alters his parameters based on that interaction. He is reactive.
I have to challenge that interpretation because we cannot ignore the ultimate outcome of that negotiation.
The outcome being the destruction.
Exactly. Did God actually change his mind, or did he know exactly how the negotiation would end from the very first syllable? Omniscience matters here. God knew there weren't 10 righteous men in Sodom.
So you think he was just playing along?
I think he allowed Abraham to negotiate, not because God needed his mind changed, but as a pedagogical exercise. He was teaching the patriarch about the precise, rigorous nature of divine justice. At the end of the day, look at chapter 19.
The fire and brimstone?
Right, Sodom and Gomorrah are still utterly annihilated by sulfur and fire from heaven. God's unilateral judgment stands exactly as it was originally intended. The negotiation changed Abraham's understanding of God. It didn't change God's decree.
You're assuming the negotiation was mere theater, but that requires reading a subtext into the narrative that completely violates the plain emotional resonance of the text.
What do you mean by emotional resonance?
When God says, I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry, he is entering into time and space to gather evidence. He is opening himself to discovery.
That seems like an anthropomorphism.
Maybe, but the God of Genesis is deeply engaged in a reactive relationship with humanity. Look earlier in the text. At the prelude to the flood in chapter 6, we see a stunning depiction of divine vulnerability.
The regret over making humanity.
Yes. God looks at the wickedness of humanity, and the Hebrew word used is nacham. The text says he repented or was touched inwardly with a sorrow of heart that he had made man. He even says, it grieves me that I have made them.
It's a powerful passage.
A playwright does not grieve over a tragedy they intentionally wrote into the script. Nacham implies a visceral emotional pivot, a change of breath. It is a God looking at the terrible misuse of human agency and feeling genuine sorrow, not a God checking off a box on a predetermined schedule.
But again, look at the mechanism of what follows. The grief is real. I don't deny the emotional weight of Nacham, but what is the result? The flood. The ultimate, definitive resetting of the board.
Brought on by human wickedness.
Sure, but after the flood, in chapter 9, God establishes the covenant of the rainbow. He simply states he will never again destroy all flesh with water. He doesn't ask Noah for his opinion.
Noah's pretty silent there.
Right. He doesn't negotiate the terms of the rainbow. He issues a sovereign decree to structure the human experience moving forward, just as he did in the Garden of Eden.
But even in Eden, the interaction is relational before it is judicial.
In what way?
God walks in paradise in the afternoon breeze looking for Adam. He calls out, "Where are you?" He asks Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" even though the voice of Abel's blood is already crying out from the ground.
But he already knows the answers to those questions.
He asks these questions because he has created a space where human beings have genuine, terrifying autonomy to answer, to lie, to hide, and to confess.
I interpret those questions, where are you, to Adam, where is your brother, to Cain, as rhetorical instruments of divine providence. God isn't stumbling around the garden because he misplaced Adam.
No, of course not.
He is prompting confession, setting the stage for the judgments and curses that must logically follow. The curse on the serpent, the multiplication of labor, the mark of Cain, these are definitive realities imposed by a sovereign God.
Imposed, yes, but imposed in reaction to human choices. You keep returning to the judgments, but the judgments only exist because the humans triggered them.
Well, the actions were foreseen.
If Adam doesn't eat the fruit, there is no curse on the land. Look closely at Cain. Before the murder, God explicitly counsels him. God says, "Sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it."
Right.
God warns Cain because Cain actually has the power to choose otherwise. If determinism is true, God's warning to Cain is almost cruel, telling a man to master a sin that God has already scripted him to commit.
It's not cruelty, it's the outworking of moral responsibility within a providential framework. And yet, even in that horrific tragedy of the first murder, Providence immediately goes to work to repair the line.
By giving them Seth.
Exactly. Seth is born to replace Abel. Through Seth comes Enoch, who walked with God, and eventually Noah, through whom all of humanity is preserved. The line is meticulously maintained.
The teleology you mentioned earlier.
Yes, the teleology is unbroken. From the calling of Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldeans to Joseph's elevation as the savior of Egypt, the grand architecture of the narrative is firmly in the hands of the divine. Genesis portrays a sovereign God who weaves even the darkest human portrayals, the deepest deceits, and the most spectacular moral failings into a magnificent, unalterable tapestry of salvation.
Unbroken, perhaps, but heavily dented by the people walking it. The perspective I hold is that Genesis honors the terrifying heavy weight of human choice.
It definitely emphasizes the weight of those choices.
It depicts a God who does not merely dictate from on high, but who partners with, adapts to, and physically wrestles with a free and flawed humanity in the dust of the earth. Human agency in this text isn't an illusion or a pedagogical trick. It's the very engine of the drama.
You know, reading through the source material, what makes Genesis so enduringly fascinating is how brilliantly it sustains this exact paradox without ever resolving it cleanly for the reader.
It really does. It refuses to give us an easy out.
Yeah.
It is a text where a man must literally physically wrestle with God in the dark to earn the name Israel, a name which embodies the essence of human struggle and agency.
And yet
that very same God promises the entire future of the world to him while he is fast asleep, doing absolutely nothing on a rock at Bethel.
it is the beauty of considering multiple perspectives. Approaching the text through both of these lenses illuminates depths and mechanisms that a singular reading would completely obscure.
Completely agree.
There is so much more to explore in this material regarding how these characters operate and how the divine interacts with them.
Absolutely. You can't fully grasp the text without holding both of those realities, the overarching script and the improvisational struggle in your hands at the exact same time.
So we leave it to you, the listener, to look at the material and consider, when the curtain rises on the human story, are the characters on the stage simply playing their assigned parts in a grandly authored, unchangeable script?
Or are they holding the pen, co-authoring the drama as the scenes unfold?
A question worth wrestling with. Until next time.